Welcome to this week's Short Clip Friday podcast. On Fridays, I will be posting clips from previous episodes, and the point here is just to bring you some of the highest yield topics from each podcast in order to kind of reinforce those topics. This clip is from the Sleep and Circadian Rhythms podcast and covers sleep stages. Enjoy. So with that, let's get into the different sleep stages. So we have 4 different sleep stages: N1, N2, N3, and REM, which stands for rapid eye movement. So let's go through these steps in the order that they would occur. And I want to start with a non-sleep stage, and that's going to be being awake. So when you are awake, you are producing very characteristic waves on the EEG. And these waves are called alpha waves. And I just remember this by grouping the A's together. So alpha awake. I just remember when you're awake, you're producing these alpha waves in your brain. And then when you get into the N1 sleep stage, which is the first sleep stage, you are changing over from being awake to being asleep. And during this short stage, which lasts only a few minutes, your heart rate, your breathing, and your eye movements begin to slow down, which are captured on the EOG. In addition to that, your muscles start to relax with only occasional twitches that are captured on the EMG. And then your brain actually starts producing what are called theta waves, which just indicate a decrease in brain activity. And these theta waves are seen on the EEG. And in this stage of sleep, N1, you can have what are called hypnagogic hallucinations. And according to this paper I read by Collerton et al. In a journal called Schizophrenia Bulletin, hypnagogic hallucinations are, quote, involuntary, spontaneous, of varying emotionality, and are found in up to 70% of the general population. Visual, auditory, and tactile sensations are most commonly reported. Visual phenomena typically consist of kaleidoscopically changing phenomena such as geometric patterns, shapes, and light flashes. Images involving animals, people, and faces in scenes also occur and are described as lifelike, highly detailed, and colorful. Voices and other sounds, like phones, doorbells, music, occur less commonly, end quote. And I've never experienced any hypnagogic hallucinations that I'm aware of or that I remember. So I thought I should kind of look up and see what some people experience. So hypnagogic hallucination is kind of what it sounds like. It's these hallucinations that occur as you're falling asleep. Sometimes, though, I do get a sensation where I'm falling right when I'm falling asleep. I'm assuming this is in N1, and what this is called is hypnagogic jerk. And what's interesting is there's an evolutionary perspective that says that this is an old primate reflex. And it essentially says that the body is misinterpreting muscle relaxation as falling out of a tree, and hence you get that falling feeling and you suddenly jerk awake. Now, in N2, the next stage of sleep, heart rate, breathing, and eye movements slow down even further, muscles relax even more, and more theta waves are produced by the brain. The interesting thing that happens in N2 in terms of the EEG is you start to see what are called sleep spindles and K complexes. And these are basically short bursts of electrical activity. And if you look at an EEG with sleep spindles, you'll see that they have a very, very short wavelength. So they look like they're these really tight, kind of packed together waves. Then you look at K complexes, and they look like essentially these theta waves, but they have a larger amplitude. So I recommend you just go kind of Google an image of a sleep spindle and a K complex to understand what they look like. The other thing I'd understand about N2 is that it is the longest sleep stage and lasts somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes. During N3, your heartbeat and breathing rate slow to their lowest levels during all of the sleep stages, and the brain starts to produce this new type of wave that's called a delta wave. And these are even slower or lower in frequency than the theta waves, indicating even further decreased brain activity. And N3 lasts between 20 and 40 minutes and is the deepest stage of sleep. And this is also the stage of sleep where sleepwalking and sleep talking occur. And honestly, I'm not really sure if sleepwalking is real. It's one of those things you hear about, but I've never actually I've never seen it or I've never heard from anyone I know that they sleepwalk. So to me, it seems like this wives' tale or this like legend. Maybe someone's listening and like they're getting upset because they actually sleepwalk and it causes problems. But is it real sleepwalking? I don't know. It's unconfirmed. And now on to the most interesting stage of sleep, in my opinion, which is REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. So I want to start by saying that during these different sleep stages, the EOG, which again is measuring this eye movement, it goes from being awake, which kind of looks like rapid waves, and you can kind of see these waves, and it goes to flat when you're in N1, even flatter when you're in N2, and then very flat when you're in N3. It's like no eye movement. And then all of a sudden, you go into REM sleep, and now it looks as though you're awake. Like if I was just looking at the EOG, I'd see those waves come back, and I'd say, wait, this person's awake. But really, they are in REM sleep. So, REM sleep is characterized by increased eye movement and increased brain activity. Your brain waves actually look fairly similar to alpha waves, as if you were awake, again, kind of like the EOG and the eye movement. You also have increased breathing rate, you have an increased heart rate. However, the one thing that stays fairly constant here is that the skeletal muscle activity is still low. So that EMG that's measuring that skeletal muscle activity that's attached to the chin, it would look similar throughout these different sleep stages. In fact, in N2 and N3, it decreases from N1, where you're still having a few twitches and you're catching those. It decreases more and more and stays fairly constant from N3 to REM. And this is important, right? Because if your skeletal muscles were to be activated while you're in a dream, you might act out that dream and cause harm to yourself or others. And that's another thing I should mention about REM sleep. That's the main stage where you dream. It's pretty rare that you dream in non-REM sleep, but it does happen. But the REM is like the main time you dream. And the REM stage of sleep starts out lasting about 10 minutes for the first sleep cycle, and then progressively gets longer and longer for the sleep cycles after the first. So you start out at maybe 10 minutes for the first sleep cycle, then maybe 20 for the next. And then by the last cycle, you have a REM stage that is about an hour long. And this brings me to my next very important point, which is that sleep is a cycle, right? It's a cycle that repeats somewhere between 5 and 6 times a night for an adult. And of course, depends upon how much sleep you're getting. If you're only sleeping for an hour, you're not going to go through 5 or 6 sleep cycles. And what's interesting to me is that it does not repeat the same stages with each cycle. So as the cycle progresses, you go from the first to the second to the third, you're losing some of these non-REM sleep stages. So for instance, let's just say that your first 2 sleep cycles you go through are normal. You do N1, then you go to N2, then you go to N3, then you go to REM. Well, then say for the third sleep cycle, you actually lose N3. So now you go from N1 to N2, then to REM. And that's your third cycle. Now on your fourth cycle, let's say that you lose N2. So now on your fourth cycle, you're just going from N1 straight into REM. And the reason, or I guess I like to think the reason that the REM stage of each cycle gets longer and longer is that you're losing these non-REM stages. And I just like to think, okay, well, I'm just throwing the amount of time that I would have been in that non-REM stage into the REM stage, and that's why that's getting longer. And there's these beautiful diagrams that show this process. They look essentially like a step function where it's showing kind of your alertness level and which stage you're in and how long each of these stages are. I would just Google like sleep cycles and search images. And if you're kind of unfamiliar with what a sleep cycle is, or you're not getting this idea of these stages repeating over and over and how that's a cycle, just go look at these images. It really helps me, and hopefully that'll help you too. All right, so back to REM sleep. So as I said, REM sleep is typically where dreams are had. Very rarely do you have dreams in non-REM sleep. And that got me kind of thinking, how often do people actually have dreams? Is it on a nightly basis? Is it on a daily basis? I guess those are the same. But I can't even remember the last time I had a dream. So as thinking of that, I kind of looked into it a little bit. And according to Margarita Tartakovsky, who is a clinical psychologist, we actually probably dream every night. The thing is, though, that we don't really remember the dreams that we had every night. And therefore, to us, it seems like we don't dream every night, which might seem pretty obvious to you. And maybe you already know that. But to me, that's really interesting and just kind of makes me sad that I can't remember all my dreams. I wish I did, and I think it'd be fun. So, to kind of wrap all that up, there are 4 sleep stages: N1, N2, N3, and REM. And those occur in several cycles throughout the night. An EEG measures electrical activity in the brain. And as you go from being awake to N1 to N2 to N3, these waves or this electrical activity in the brain actually slows down, right? You go from alpha waves to theta, then to delta in N3. And what's interesting, though, is as soon as you reach the REM stage of sleep, the brain waves actually look fairly similar to as if you were awake. In terms of EMG, it measures muscle activity, and this muscle activity decreases as you get further and further into the sleep stages and maintains its low activity in the REM stage of sleep, which prevents you from acting out your dreams. And this inhibition of muscle contraction seen during REM sleep is called atonia. Then lastly, you have EOG, which captures eye movement and is particularly important for capturing the rapid eye movement that is characteristic of REM sleep.
At Med School Coach, we know that getting into medical school is hard. In fact, 60% of pre-meds who apply to medical school don't even get accepted. And if you want to get accepted into a top medical school, it's even harder. It's a complicated process, and even students with great grades and MCAT scores get left out. That's why more students than ever are turning to Med School Coach for admissions advising. Our advisors are all physicians and former admissions committee members, so they know exactly what medical schools are looking for. One-on-one admissions advising from Med School Coach makes all the difference. Our expert team will help you develop a game plan, prepare your application, edit your essays, and coach you for interviews. Every pre-med has a story, and we'll help you tell it so you can stand out from the crowd. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach admissions advising package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.